Butterflies feeding on buddleia in late July and August is a familiar sight to most people, but it could be that that is as far as their interest goes. Today though, a greater awareness of butterflies seems to be occurring, and more people are wanting to look further than the buddleia to see and identify the other species of butterfly that occur in the British Isles. There are 60 species in all, not including a number of rare vagrants that occasionally visit our shores. This video is aimed at being an identification guide. We'll deal with each family of butterflies separately so that similar and closely related species can be compared and the differences pointed out. The time of year they fly and the types of habitat will also be described. Like the swallowtail, the Duke of Burgundy is the only member of its family in the British Isles, but it is also well represented in other countries. In earlier times, it was thought to be a fritillary, and it does have some similarities, but it's much smaller than any of the British fritillaries. It is quite uncommon. It occurs where cowslips grow. This is a typical site for the Duke of Burgundy. The caterpillars feed on the cowslips, a plant that has declined considerably and must have led to the decline in this species. They occur on chalk and limestone in the south. The flight period is from mid-May till mid-June. The silver spots of the underside do look rather fritillary-like, and it's easy to see why early entomologists thought it belonged to the fritillary family. Another large family with 16 species. 8 of them can be broadly classed as belonging to the admirals, and the remaining 8 are species of fritillary. The small tortoiseshell is one of our commonest butterflies, and because some of them hibernate over the winter, they can be seen at almost any time of the year if the weather is warm. The caterpillars feed on stinging nettles. The large tortoiseshell is probably our rarest British butterfly. It may even be extinct as a resident species. It's quite easy to breed in captivity, and most sightings in the wild could be attributed to escapes. The underside is dark, similar to the small tortoiseshell. The food plant of the larvae is elm, and the Dutch elm disease in the 1970s must have hastened the decline of this species. The peacock is also very common and can be seen in almost any month of the year. It's particularly noticeable in July and August, feeding on buddleia. It's one of our most widespread species, occurring everywhere except in the north of Scotland. The red admiral is an immigrant species. The largest numbers arrive from late May, but they can be seen right till the end of the middle of October. It is another butterfly that can typically be seen feeding on buddleia in July and August. Like the small tortoiseshell, the caterpillars feed on stinging nettles. The comma was an uncommon butterfly in the 19th century, but it's now locally plentiful in the south. Because it hibernates in the winter, it can often be seen very early in the spring, and can also be seen at almost any time in warm spells. No other British butterfly has this ragged outline. The underside has a comma mark in the centre of the hind wing, which gives it its name. The white admiral is rather uncommon. It emerges at the end of June and can be seen till the end of August. By this time they are usually rather worn and torn by brambles, which they favour to nectar on. It's strictly a southern species. It likes woodland, where it can be seen gliding swiftly along rides and glades. Honeysuckle is the plant which the caterpillars feed on. The purple emperor, this is the male, is perhaps our most majestic butterfly. It occurs very locally in parts of the south. It needs good mature woodland with tall oaks, from the tops of which the males patrol their territories. The best hope of seeing them is about the first week of July. At this time they have the habit of descending to the ground to drink salts. They will even feed on animal droppings. This is the underside, which is quite similar in both sexes. The female lacks the purple sheen and looks rather like a large, less slender white admiral. The painted lady is an immigrant species to this country. They are unable to overwinter at any stage of their life cycle. They arrive in the spring in variable numbers from North Africa and the Mediterranean. August is the best time to see them though, when they are another species attracted to the buddleia. By October they have all gone. The pearl-bordered fritillary is holding its own quite well, but none of the fritillaries are very common. This is the first in the year to fly. A warm day in early May may bring out the first ones, and they continue to fly to the end of the third week in June. It is a butterfly of sunny woodland rides, and particularly favours the early stages of development of cleared woodland that has been replanted. The underside is an important identification feature for all the fritillaries. In this case, note that as well as the silver pearly border of the hindwing, in the centre there is a single silver dot and dash. Violets are important as a food plant for the caterpillars. The small pearl-bordered fritillary emerges a couple of weeks later than the pearl-bordered. The upper side is very similar. They are smaller, but this is not very noticeable, and what makes it more difficult is that they often occur in the same places as the pearl-bordered. It's possible to separate this species from the pearl-bordered by the fact that the underside of the hindwing has quite a number of silver patches, as well as the dot and dash. The larvae also feed on violets. The marsh fritillary can be seen from the second half of May to the beginning of July. Its distribution is mainly in the west. It's one of our most rapidly declining species. It does occur in damp places, but not always, but there must be devil's bit scabious present. This is the plant that the caterpillars must feed on. It has a characteristic way of basking with its wings held back in a rather delta-winged fashion. The underside is a mix of yellow and orange-brown. The Glanville fritillary only occurs in the British Isles along the south coast of the Isle of Wight. It favours the grassy slopes of the undercliffs where the ribwort plantain grows, on which the females lay their eggs. Bird's foot trefoil and field scabious are favourite plants to nectar on. The underside is really beautiful and quite diagnostic. The heath fritillary is one of our rarest butterflies. It is one of the few species that is protected by Schedule 1 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. It still occurs locally in a few places in the West Country, where it is usually on heathland. In the east there are a couple of sites where it favours woodland rides. Mid-June till the end of July is the time to see them. The underside, like the other fritillaries, has a characteristic pattern. The high brown fritillary is now one of our rarest and most declining species. It still occurs in a few places in the west and around the Morecambe Bay area. It needs dog violet to be present as a larval food plant, but research has shown that bracken is also an important part of its habitat. The upper side is very similar to the male dark green fritillary, but the edge of the forewing is less rounded. Also, the male has two parallel shiny veins to the centre of the forewing. They emerge at the end of June and fly to the beginning of August. The underside is the best guide for identification. Notice the line of chestnut red rings with silver spots inside. No other fritillary has this pattern. The silver wash fritillary is our largest and most plentiful fritillary, although not as common as it used to be. It favours mature woodland and can be seen from July to the beginning of September, flying along woodland rides and glades, nectaring on thistles and various umbels. The pale green-silver washed underside gives it its name. It is another fritillary that relies on dog violet as food plant for the larvae. The dark green fritillary, this is the female, is still widespread and fairly common, but again not as common as it used to be. It is an insect of more open country, such as grassy downland and even heath and moorland. The markings of the female are darker than the male, and it is often powdery green towards the body. The male looks very like a high brown fritillary, but the forewings are more rounded, and it does not have the two parallel shiny veins in the middle of the forewing. The underside shows the dark green from which it gets its name. The hindwing has a number of evenly spaced silver patches. The dog violet is again the food plant for the caterpillars.